This is a three-part series on communities for a cure. This is a collaborative uh, personal health record that we have been using at the Barrow Institute in Phoenix, Arizona for the last 10 years. Part one will show how one empowers patients through advocacies, the basic framework. Part two will be on technology, and three will show other opportunities that might be available. We all know the traditional model for care of patients. This is the provider-centric model we're all familiar with. Some of you may remember Marcus Welby and his sidekick, Dr. Kiley. The patients come to Dr. Welby. Dr. Welby may have a registry. He may be keeping certain patients with certain diseases in his office for study. Unfortunately, this leads to a relatively siloed level of care where Dr. Welby's records are kept separate from other providers, and there's no interoperability. Of course, we're all familiar with this as well, where care today is largely paper-based. Patients spend time in clinics and hospitals. These are also siloed records of information that often don't talk. And of course, there is care at home, but little, if any, effort is spent collecting data from the patient as to their overall wellness from home. Of course, if one really looks at where care really occurs, care occurs predominantly at home, with 98% of it being your own wellness outside of the clinic and hospital. This is opposite where the majority of record keeping takes place. So what really needs to occur for patients to be able to collaborate in their own care is a way for them to report about themselves that is patient-centric rather than provider-centric. And so the new model is a disease-centric, disease registry that is patient-centric, that aggregates information by the patient for the patient, and the provider is in fact part of this ecosystem, but only a participant rather than central to it. I want to call out again the difference between the provider-reported registries on the right, which we're all familiar with. These are collections of a healthcare provider with usually small numbers of patients, and this is only one of many activities that the caregiver may be involved in, as opposed to self-reported registries would put the patient as central to this process. This framework that I'm describing is a self-reported registry. Again, the numbers of patients that enroll are often in the tens of thousands, and there's a much higher investment, of course, because the patient is really the one who wants to get better. Of course, when we talk about communities, I'm talking about communities for a cure, but we're all familiar with different kinds of communities. Facebook and LinkedIn are communities. The Komen pink ribbon is one we're all familiar with. Communities can be centered around any interest of a particular group of people. These communities for a cure leverage really three things. One is self-interest. We're basically taking advantage of the patient's desire to get better. Number two is content. An advocate is sitting in between the patient and others, and they're vetting the content, making sure that the best possible content is provided. And then finally, there's a technology layer that enables active communication between the advocate and the patient, as well as others who want to talk to that community. So just from a macro perspective, if I have a new diagnosis, a new disease, that's really my problem. Others may be sympathetic, but it's really my problem. It's only human nature that we tend to aggregate with others who have a similar problem to us. You may see patients who come together around any particular cause, breast cancer, MS, Parkinson's, you name it, there's certain to be a blog or a patient community. When it really gets interesting is when those patients then find someone who can speak to others for them, that they have a voice. At that point, the communication bridge, the advocate, offers an opportunity for sustainable revenue where the community can actually interact with others, and at that point, the crowd of people become an active community. So here's the basic model for sustainable revenue. You have patients over here who have a discussion with an advocate who asks them repeated questions about them. Tell me about you. How old you are, how many drugs you're on, how long you've had disease. As the community grows, researchers and pharma may come to the advocate and say, I'd like to find patients of a certain demographic, a certain age, and a certain number of years of disease. Can you find those for me? The advocate can look back in his database, find those patients, and tell them, you've been invited to participate in a trial. If you'd like to do that, contact the researcher directly. Note, this protects the patient confidentiality at all times, and in fact the database is not strictly open to all but only the advocate. For that transaction where the patient then has voluntary participation with the researcher, there is a financial exchange with a sustainable business model for the advocate. Really, when you look at communities, they're very simple in terms of what the advocate is offering the patient. It's a very simple viral enrollment. Please come and join our community. Second is engagement. What kinds of goods and services can I offer you that make this a valuable experience? And third is repeated communication. The advocate has to be able to talk to the patient, has to be able to begin to understand who that patient is so that they can have a sophisticated information exchange that others may be interested in. Again, enrollment, engagement, and communication are the basis for any of these communities. This ends part one of the macro view for communities for cure.